What's up, everybody? Got a special this evening because it felt appropriate given the timing. Trade deadline special. We'll go over a few things this evening. The trade deadline is in all likelihood this week or next in your fantasy league. If it has already passed, then it is too early. I'll throw that out there as a blanket statement. If your league's trade deadline has already come and gone, let's talk about pushing that back next year. Let's get on the horn with the commissioners of your leagues. If you are the commissioner, push that thing back. There's an extra week in the NFL regular season now, which has extended by nature the fantasy regular season and has extended the wait until the fantasy playoffs. I have week 12, with week 15 being the default start of the fantasy playoffs in the newer-ish still format of the NFL schedule that has added an 18th week, a 17th game, an 18th week. If the trade deadline is still the same week that it was prior to the NFL adding this extra game a few years ago, it's time for your league to kick that one down or out a week to about week 12 or so. So, with that said, that means that the trade deadline in all likelihood for your league is within the next 14 days. So we'll take a look at the different playoff schedules that each team has, and ultimately that'll help make a call and determine different players that are worth scouring your league's rosters, starting rosters, or rosters in general, to see who makes sense as a target, and maybe if you have certain players who make sense to sell, who to move off of to get a trade done. So this will be primarily geared toward trades tonight and any potential moves that can help shape your roster with the fantasy playoffs approaching in less than a month at this point. So we will take a look at each team's playoff schedules. That's weeks 15, 16, and 17. And ultimately from there, make a call if it is a positive matchup for any portion of the offense. Maybe it's the entire offense. Maybe it's just the quarterback. Maybe it's just the receivers. We'll take a look at that. And then, of course, if you have any questions specific to a trade that you may have ongoing or you're in conversations with or something that's in the works, let me know. We can sort that out and ultimately see if it's worth getting something done versus should you sit tight and not do anything, stand pat, so to speak. Because sometimes, as you all know the whole montage, sometimes the best move that you make is the move that you don't make. So we'll try to make a call ultimately on what makes the most sense for your roster with the fantasy playoffs fast approaching. Let me know when your league's trade deadline is. Is it this week? Is it next week? Again, hopefully it hasn't already passed. It shouldn't have. It should still be, the deadline should still be approaching in your league. It shouldn't have already passed. If it has, then it's too early and we need to talk to your commissioners about getting that updated. What's going on, Emil? Good to see you. As always, same cadence. Members will get questions answered in priority order, followed by supers, and then the general public, everybody else. I will be going through playoff schedules. So I'll be taking a look at that. I may not see a question as quickly as I normally would, but we're going to go into it for each team. And that'll help to ultimately determine moves that make sense. So we'll get into it. There's a website called Spike Week. And they have like a whole section on fantasy football playoff schedules. I would share it, but the text is kind of small in the screen share of the stream, so it might not be super helpful for you. But if you care to look at, to check it out, click the link and follow along. That might be a little bit easier easier on the eyes and a little bit easier as far as consumption, as far as figuring out the different teams' playoff schedules. What's going on, Chuck? Good to see you. Appreciate you coming in and hanging out. I'm going to take a couple of teams now, and then I will get into questions again. This is specifically geared toward trades. This is a trade special. Please hold any start-sit questions for later in the week. Appreciate it. I'll go in alphabetical order, and we'll go from there. Let's kick things off. The Arizona Cardinals. I wonder if I can just... I'm just going to type it in. Let me see if I can... let's see how this works. And then that way we can focus on... I'm just going to start with the Arizona Cardinals. Yep, I can do that. I'm going to post each team in alphabetical order with their playoff schedule in the chat, and then I'll highlight it, and then we'll go from there. So Arizona has Week 15 against New England at home. Week 16 at Carolina. Good matchup there. Week 17, I think we're getting a pretty good team to highlight and talk about right off the bat. At the LA Rams. All right, this is where we're going to start. And I wish that it would have... I tried to stack it so that it was a little bit more digestible, but nevertheless, it's still... Let me see if I can edit this. Nope, I can't. Great. Awesome. We're just going to keep it moving. So, the Cardinals, pretty favorable playoff schedule moving forward. And again, you obviously need to be in a position. You might be on the outside looking in, so the weeks that you're looking at are right now. So, general rule of thumb, generally speaking, if you're on the outside looking in and you need to win games you're not quite in the playoff picture yet, but maybe with a win or two, you'll be jumping back into the top six or however many teams in your league make the playoffs. Any trades that you make need to be shipping away players that can't help you in the short term in exchange for players who can. You're not worried necessarily about weeks 15, 16, and 17 yet if you're not 6-4, 7-3, 8-2. If you're 4-6, 3-7 might be a little too far out of it. But if you're 4-6 or 5-5 and you're right on that cusp, generally speaking, trade for players who can help you now, not players that are either on a bye or they have a bye week coming up or they're injured and they're hopefully coming back, but we don't necessarily know definitively when they're coming back. Get healthy players now. We'll deal with the rest later if you are on the outside looking in for the fantasy playoffs. But Arizona looking really strong for the fantasy playoffs. New England, at Carolina, at the LA Rams. I can tell you right now, if you have James Conner, there is one thing to do, and that is nothing. Hold James Conner. This is a beautiful schedule for him. Nothing scary about the Patriots defense at home. Carolina is the best run funnel, the best run matchup for opposing running backs in the NFL. And then you've got the LA Rams. They're a funnel on defense across the board. They played a little bit better against the Dolphins, but that's because the Dolphins have looked kind of anemic this year on offense. Kyler Murray, he might be a little bit more difficult to acquire coming off of such a strong game after the Jets, but he is on bye this week. So if your quarterback situation is in flux, but at the same time you have a good record, you're in good shape, because that's entirely possible. Quarterback is something you can kind of skirt by with on a week-to-week basis. But if you have a good record and a good situation and you're not in dire straits this week, consider checking in on Kyler Murray. Look at that playoff schedule. That is beautiful. On the road in Carolina, that's a West Coast team going east, so like the early time start could be a little bit of an issue, but honestly, when that's the worst intangible of a playoff schedule, you live with that. So Kyler Murray should be a trade target. James Conner should be a trade target. Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride should be trade targets. Harrison might see Christian Gonzalez week 15. I guess he might see J.C. Horn week 16. That hasn't been a scary shutdown matchup. But then the Rams, they've they don't have much going on defense. Acquire the Arizona Cardinals. We can start with that right off the bat. Acquire the Arizona Cardinals. I have a question right here I can take real quick. Do you trade Hawkinson for Mike Evans? Yeah, I mean, again, so if you can stomach the absence, he's on bye. They're both on bye this week. So, you're going to have to get some other tight end. You're going to have to pick up another tight end. Obviously, while Otten is on bye, and Evans is expected to come back after the bye week, but it's not a definitive guarantee. If you're in good shape, you're 6-4, you're 7-3, you're 8-2. Maybe you're 6-4, but you've had some unlucky matchups, but you've scored a bunch of points. Like you're 6-4, but your position is safe. You're in a good spot. If you're in the top 4 or 5 of your league and you're feeling good about your chances to make the playoffs, I am totally good with acquiring Mike Evans for TJ Hawkinson if you have somebody like Cade Otton ready to go. You just have to be able to be in a position where you can stomach the multiple bye weeks. And, of course, Evans is an injury risk coming back. But he should command a number 1 wide receiver target share. Nobody has really stepped up in the wide receiver department since Evans and Godwin went down that Monday night. So you figure Evans is going to be just fine when he comes back, if he comes back from a opportunity and volume perspective. So I'm okay with this as long as you're in good shape. You're okay with it. I'm okay with this trade as long as your record is where it needs to be. Okay, we went over Arizona. I'm going to keep it moving with Atlanta. I really wish that when I posted these freaking comments that they would actually stack in an order that the way I would want to, the way that I would like to. Atlanta Falcons playoff schedule. They have a pretty good schedule as well. They have a pretty good schedule as well. And on top of the Cardinals being buys everywhere, I would keep an eye on their defense as well. Week 15 at home against New England. And honestly, even if it's on the road, Carolina and the Rams, you could do worse than a streaming option than the Arizona Cardinals in that type of matchup. Atlanta Falcons playoff schedule. They are this is good. Week 15 at Las Vegas. Week 16 home against the New York Giants. And then week 17, this one's a little bit tougher, but it's not terrible. I'm going to keep this moving. The Falcons playoff schedule, week 15 on the road against the Raiders, week 16 at home against the New York Giants, week 17 championship week on the road against the Washington Commanders. 2 games on the road, 1 at home, but one of those games, Vegas, is in a dome, so nothing to be too concerned about there. Week 17 in Washington, we could potentially be looking at some bad weather at that point because we're talking about, the end of December in the Northeast. So there's some potential for bad weather. Week 17, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I can tell you right now, right off the bat, when you get the Raiders and the Giants in weeks 15 and 16, you're not probably going to be able to buy Bijan Robinson. If you can make it happen, though, if you have another stud running back and you could do like a 1-for-1 swap, your guy for Bijan, you may want to consider looking into that given this playoff schedule. That is as good as it gets. And then if you have Bijan hold, do nothing, find a way to get Tyler Algier, whether he's on waivers or if he's on somebody else's team. If you have Bijan Robinson, acquire Tyler Algier by any means necessary. This is the time of year where you want to start, again, when you are in good shape for the playoffs, you want to start shaping your roster to maximize the output and the performance that you're expecting for the playoffs. If you have Bijan and you can handcuff him with Tyler Algier with this playoff schedule and you are in good shape to make the playoffs as it currently stands, go get Tyler Algier. Make that trade happen. Send a wide receiver. Send another supplemental running back, whatever you have to do to make it happen. If somebody has Algier rostered but doesn't have Bijan. If you have Bijan and you are trying to get, you're trying to shape your playoff roster, go see what it's going to take to get Tyler Algier. Obviously, don't break the bank, but if you can get him for a wide receiver 3 or another RB3 or RB4 would be ideal. Make that happen. This playoff schedule is too good to ignore. Same can be said for, honestly, the rest of the offense as well. Vegas, Vegas is very beatable on the ground. They're giving up on the season about 130 rushing yards per game. They have been a little more stingy against the pass. However, they have been more susceptible the past few weeks. And of course, the team is going nowhere. Things are spiraling out of control for the Raiders. I thought I heard on the Fantasy Footballers today that Desmond Ridder might actually get the start for them. No, they're going with Minshew. Ridder will remain the backup. Regardless, this is a Raiders team going absolutely nowhere. You can capitalize on those types of matchups and opportunities late in the season, even if on paper they're less than ideal. I'll take Drake London if you can get him against the Raiders and against the Giants. He would probably have to see Marshawn Lattimore week 17, but this is not, all-pro Marshawn Lattimore anymore. This is an older, has compiled some injuries, Marshawn Lattimore, who may not necessarily be the dominant shutdown corner that he once was. So I wouldn't be scared off of trying to kick the tires on a Drake London trade if it's going to be difficult. He's a top flight wide receiver, but he's worth looking into. And obviously the same can be said for Darnell Mooney. These guys have been performing incredibly well for most of the season, so they're going to be difficult to pry away. But if you have them, you may want to just consider holding your Atlanta Falcons. That's a damn good playoff schedule. That's a really good playoff schedule. What's going on, Greg? Good to see you got Houston's defense. Yep, Texans are a good Texans are a good play this week, and Estime is a good hold. So nicely done. Let's move back to the questions. What's good? I can't appreciate it, T-Man. Would I trade Pollard for Shakir? You have McCaffrey, you have Connor, you have Rico, you have Debo, Wandale, Quentin Johnston. So grabbing another wide receiver isn't the worst idea. Let me see the playoffs. For the fantasy playoffs, I'll just take a look at really quickly. We'll take a look at the Titans. If you were to acquire Khalil Shakir, I'm going to look at the Titans and I'm going to look at the Bills. Shakir gets in the playoffs. Detroit, week 15, that's a good matchup by the numbers. New England, week 16 at home, that's a good matchup by the numbers. And the Jets, week 17, that's not a good matchup by the numbers, but the Jets might be toast by then. So it might not matter. And Shakir will avoid Sauce Gardner because he'll be in the slot. Sauce Gardner will probably be either on Amari Cooper or Keon Coleman. And again, the Jets might be burnt toast by that point anyway. Pollard, his playoff schedule, we'll look at this really quickly, is Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Jacksonville. I got to be honest, that's a pretty damn good playoff schedule for Tony Pollard. That is not bad at all. That's pretty damn good. Cincinnati, they give up 127 yards per game on the ground. Jacksonville is the worst run defense in the NFL this side of Carolina. And honestly, over the past month, they've been even worse. Over the past month, Jacksonville has they've been the worst against running backs in the NFL. Indianapolis, not much better. They're bottom 3 as well. They've been a little bit better over the past month relative to their season totals that they've allowed. But on the season, the Indianapolis Colts are a bottom 3 run defense. That is an excellent playoff stretch for Tony Pollard. Could you make it happen with, say, like Rico and I don't know if they're going to go for Wandale. Could you try Rico straight up instead of Pollard. Pollard, and you have McCaffrey coming back, so obviously he's bulletproof. And I just mentioned James Conner has a spectacular fantasy playoff schedule, but Pollard does as well. Could you try Rico for Shakir? And I know that might be, I don't want to. I never want to send disrespectful offers out, but obviously people might not be into Rico now that Dak Prescott is gone for the season, and that Cowboys offense is probably going in the tank for the rest of the year. So Rico's not super appealing, but he is a starting running back, and starting running backs produce even in bad situations, just from a volume perspective. Could you try Rico instead of Pollard? Looking at Pollard's playoff schedule, I don't really want to give him up. But I do want to upgrade your wide receivers, so I think your mindset is on the right track. If it has to be Pollard, if your trade partner is insistent on Pollard, I would bring up his playoff schedule and say, all right, if I give you Pollard, his playoff schedule is excellent, so I'm going to need Shakir plus something else, or a step above Shakir at wide receiver. I would haggle if it has to be Pollard. So see what negotiations you can cook up with the person in your league who you're doing these discussions with. Trade London for Debo and trade Dell for Devontae Smith. I don't know that I would necessarily trade London for Debo. Debo's been a little up and down this year. McCaffrey is back. Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall appear to be regular contributors. Like, Debo's going to have his weeks, but he's been kind of like spike week happy. And while you want the spike weeks, if he underperforms, that's going to kill. He's one of your heavy hitters. That's going to kill you in the fantasy playoffs. San Francisco's schedule in the fantasy playoffs is actually not bad. The Rams at home, the Dolphins on the road is less than ideal. And then at home against the Detroit Lions, is what is potentially shaping up to be a rematch of the NFC Championship game. We'll see. We'll see what actually happens there. But the Rams and the Lions by the numbers are good numbers for Debo. The Dolphins, not as much. They're actually pretty stingy against opposing passing offenses. Again, London, on the other hand, has a little bit more of a favorable path, in my opinion. The Raiders on the road, the Giants at home, and then Washington week 17. That is a road game for a dome team, and it's possible there's bad weather in Washington because it's late December. I think I might keep London. Debo's one of those guys where it's definitely worth rolling the dice on, but he's approaching all or nothing territory, and that makes him more volatile that makes him more volatile than we would prefer. As far as Dell versus Devontae Smith, Houston gets Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore. That is a brutal, brutal stretch. The Eagles, on the other hand, their playoff schedule is Pittsburgh, Washington, Dallas. Pittsburgh is not a good matchup, but Washington is a good matchup. Dallas is a good matchup by the numbers, but that could be a game where the Eagles handle their business early and Devontae doesn't need to do a whole lot. So you're swapping like kind of a less than ideal situation for a less than ideal situation. I guess I like Devontae Smith's matchups and situation a little bit better than I like Tank Dell's. So that one I'm a little bit more into. That one I'm a little more open to. Plus, Jalen Hurts has been playing really well recently, and Stroud has been very average. So I'll take the good quarterback play right now. Hurts is hot. So I'll take Devontae Smith for Tank Dell. Debo for London, I'm not as bullish on because London has a good playoff schedule. Debo doesn't have a bad playoff schedule, but he's approaching boom bust territory and not so much like consistency. So that's a concern. Devontae Smith for Tank Dell, where you acquire Devontae Smith, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And Greg, I apologize. I missed this. Need a wide receiver upgrade. So again, Debo can give you a 25-point week, but then there could be another week where he gives you, 7 or 8 fantasy points. And for a guy of Debo's expectations and caliber, that's just not going to get it done in the fantasy playoffs. Marvin Harrison Jr., again, I like the Arizona Cardinals playoff schedule is looking really strong, Greg, so I'm perfectly fine with hanging on to Marvin. And Dobbs has the Green Bay Packers are an offense that you're going to want to target for the fantasy playoffs. At Seattle, home against New Orleans, home against Minnesota. I want a guy like Romeo Dobbs as an option for me there. So I actually think you're okay here. I actually think you're all right, Greg. I think you're okay. I don't think I would worry too much about this. If you can, I would try to trade for. I would try to make a move for Darnell Mooney, Greg. The Falcons have a pretty favorable fantasy playoff schedule. Again, at Vegas, home against the Giants, on the road against Washington. That Washington game is a little bit of a concern. Maybe there could be some bad weather in Washington. It'll be late December in the Northeast, so you never know. But those first 2 matchups are beautiful. The Raiders and the Giants. Those are the types of teams that you want to target. Vegas has been a little bit better against the pass on the season, but they haven't been as good recently. They're starting to get a little leaky, and their season is going south. So by this time, by week 15, they could be mailing it in. I would try to grab Mooney. I would be okay with grabbing Mooney if you can. And again, maybe try to dangle Rico Dowdle. I like Rico, but he's no longer a guy where I'm like, let's hold him for as long as we can and see how this goes. The Cowboys offense is going nowhere fast for the rest of this year. So they are a team that I am perfectly fine where, outside of CeeDee Lamb, I am perfectly fine selling the Cowboys pieces for scraps and parts. So if you can move like Rico, for, I don't know, like Rico plus for Mooney. I don't know if that's going to get it done, but maybe you can get a depth running back in return. I would try that. Or hell, even try Estime. The hype is real now, and Mooney is established. I don't want Jalen Waddle, and just because I don't even need to look at the schedule. Miami's offense has just been disappointing. Garrett Wilson could be intriguing, but I imagine he's going to cost more. Yeah. Let's see. Tyler, I appreciate the Superman. Thank you so much. I was admittedly not intending to take start sit questions tonight, but you did, you sent a super and I appreciate the generosity. So I'm happy to accommodate. There's always exceptions to the rules. You know what I mean? Bateman, Downs, or Tank Dell. I'm probably leaning Dell here. Houston has the Cowboys on the road. Bateman has the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I believe that's a road game for Baltimore. That is not a good matchup. And as far as Downs, I mean, he's intriguing because he's a good player, but Anthony Richardson is now the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts once again. I don't know how confident we can be in Anthony Richardson in his first start in a few weeks going up against the New York Jets, who admittedly did just get boat raced by Kyler Murray, but they still have good players on that defense. Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed in the secondary are both still really good football players, so that is a tough spot for Downs. I think my answer here is Dell. On Sunday night, 5 catches, 39 yards. Obviously not great, but he had 9 targets. That's pretty noteworthy. And against Dallas, he'll have this will be an easier matchup for him. I would probably go Dell. I'll probably go Dell. Dallas is middle of the pack against the pass, but again, their season is in the toilet. Yeah, I would have. Yeah, let's. I'll say Dell for now, Tyler. I do want to. I appreciate the super. I do want to focus on trades this evening. Again, the other thing is with start sit questions. This goes for everybody. We only have Wednesday's practice reports. You know what I mean? Like a lot can change between now and Sunday. Obviously, if you have a start sit question that pertains to the Thursday night game, that's fair. And I'll also be live tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, ahead of Thursday night football to lock in any potential start sit questions that pertain to Eagles Commanders. So, once we have more information, the start sit questions are a little easier to answer just because we'll have more practice information. But for now, I would probably pick Dell in a pretty good matchup against the Cowboys. Chuck, man, I appreciate the Superman. That was not necessary, but I appreciate it all the same. Thank you so much. Let's see what we got here. This is a dynasty question, Superflex. Let's see. You lost Dak for the year. Caleb has been disappointing. But you have Russ, so that helps. Wide receivers are solid. You got Hawk back, nice. You need more points next year. Okay. Would I trade away a second Aaron Jones and Liggett? Is that Tyreek Hill, Chuck? Or Taysom? And then that's Javon Baker, right? He's the Patriots. He's the Patriots like 4th round pick, I believe, who he hasn't done a whole heck of a lot this year. He's very much like a developmental piece. Trade away a second, trade away Aaron Jones, trade away Liggett, acquire. Is that I have to assume it's Tyreek Hill for Jones. A young player like Liggett. It's not Taysom. It's definitely it's got to be Tyreek. I don't know, Chuck. I don't know that I would necessarily do that. Tyreek Hill, first of all, is currently, I believe, the wide receiver like 40 this year in points per game. And I know you're asking about next year, but we are he's dealing with this wrist injury. We're a few months away from Tyreek turning 31. And obviously Tyreek is one of one. He's an outlier from the perspective of he's going to go down as probably an all-time great at the position. You expect those guys to last longer by nature of the beast than somebody who's quite simply not as good as them, right? The best, the greats, they find ways to stay good for longer, or maybe they don't even need to find it. They're just that talented. And in Tyreek's case, he's that talented. However, for as great as Tyreek Hill is and has been, at the end of the day, he is a wide receiver that relies on blazing fast speed. He turns 31 next year. We can talk all day long about how we want Tyreek Hill to remain upper echelon overall wide receiver 1 Tyreek Hill. But the fact of the matter is eventually he's going to lose a step. And when I say eventually, I would bet that it's probably going to be sooner than later when he's a soon-to-be 31-year-old wide receiver who relies primarily on world-class speed. Make no mistake, he is a world-class, as far as his speed. Tyreek Hill could probably compete with Olympic sprinters. That's how fast he is. But unfortunately, that's the type of stuff that deteriorates quicker. It's just your raw talent. So from a dynasty perspective, I know Aaron Jones is older, but Liggett now has a clear path, at least for now, for the Panthers to emerge as a starting wide receiver at worst for the next 4 or 5 years, and you're giving up a draft pick, Javon Baker could turn into something. But he's behind Demario Douglas. He's behind Jalen Polk. The Patriots are probably going to address wide receiver in some way, shape, or form within the next offseason or two, which would theoretically push Baker down the line a little bit. I don't know that I would necessarily do this, because I think Aaron Jones is an excellent piece to help you win for the rest of this year. Yeah. I don't know that I would do this, Chuck. I don't. Tyreek is excellent. Has been excellent, but he hasn't been excellent this year. And while there is still time for him to turn a corner and turn things around, this wrist injury that he's dealing with, where he's got a torn ligament, that is clearly hampering him. He got a touchdown this past week against the Rams. That was awesome, but it was also a little lucky because Jonnu Smith got tackled at the 1-yard line. You don't expect Tyreek Hill to be all affected by those types of things, but this year he has been, and he's only getting older. He's not, he's not somebody who he's closer to exiting his prime than he is to entering it or staying in it. He might be awesome for one more year, and then he might be good for another year after that. And then what are we looking at? We also have to keep in mind, and this will be the last thing I say here because I've spent a decent amount of time on it. Tyreek also alluded to a couple years ago that he wanted to retire sooner than later. That he wanted to retire by the end of his Dolphins contract. So, where does that stand? Is he actually going to do it, or is he going to stick around a little bit longer? I'm just going to look up his contract really quickly, and then I'm going to keep it moving. He's okay. So he has another year in 2025, and then there's a potential out in 2026, where the Dolphins would not have a dead cap hit if they just cut him outright after the 2025 season. Honestly, that is a very real possibility. We might only be looking at one more year of Tyreek Hill, and we might only be looking at maybe 1 or 2 more years of Aaron Jones as well, but we're looking at more than that for Xavier Leggett plus the 2025 second-round pick. I think the points you're looking for next year are in the trade where you would potentially be moving them. I think I would keep what you have. And yeah, Greg, Dowdle, if you can swing Dowdle for Mooney straight up, you have Bijan, you have Jones, you have Mixon, you just picked up Aldrich Estime, Slayer of Dragons, first of his name, long may he reign. I would entertain Dowdle for Mooney. I love the Falcons playoff schedule, and I just don't, outside of CeeDee Lamb, who is really dicey himself rest of season, I am good with moving off of the Cowboys pieces if you can. Dowdle, Ferguson, Tolbert in deeper leagues is probably just a drop outright. Yeah, this is not a good situation in Dallas. So if you can, I would do that. If you can make that happen, Greg, I would do that. You're right, Derek, and it's good to see you. I don't think I said hi. What's going on? This has been a weird year where there are a lot of injuries. So if you are trying to execute a trade, you're going to have to get creative in some scenarios, some instances, on top of potentially dealing with some league mates that just don't like to make trades. They don't want to make trades. And I'm sure you have exhausted every avenue, but if you text them, call them, get on the horn with them, try to talk things through. If they are adamant that they don't want to do anything, then there's only so much that you can control. But yeah, between stubborn managers, when we all have them, every league has them, stubborn managers that don't like to trade, which is fine. It makes things a little less fun, but also we have to respect how people operate. But yes, lots of injuries, lots of uncertainty with certain players. it adds an extra wrinkle where you have to kind of get creative. Let's see. What's going on, David? Again, I'm happy to take questions really quick that aren't trade questions, but I am trying to focus this stream on trade questions and the trade topic in general. But as far as waivers go, I mean, I wouldn't worry too much, David, because this is for next week. I mean, I don't know I don't know who's available on your wire. So if you want to give me a list, David, of the options that are on your wire, and then who you would subsequently drop to pick any of those players up. But for now, I mean, you're fine. There's no moves that are imminent until next week. So let me know who is available, and let me know who you could conceivably drop to make it happen, and I can take a look. Again, I see some more people in here. Welcome in. Happy not random, but special Wednesday show. Wanted to get a trade conversation in before the trade deadline. I assume most folks, your trade deadline is either this week or next week. If it has already passed, then it was too early, and we need to talk to your commissioners about pushing that trade deadline date out a week or two in the future. So I can quickly take other member questions in general, but I'm going to be focusing primarily on trades this evening. And of course, I can take start-sit questions starting tomorrow when I go live for Thursday. Let's see. Where did I leave off? Yeah. So I'll just quickly say if you're still in here, I'll take Estime because I don't trust the Miami Dolphins right now. But again, let's see what practice reports and injury reports all look like going into the weekend. Yeah, try Rico for Shakir. See if you can get that done. I would be okay with that. Let's see. Where else do what else do I have? Again, so I would come back later in the week if you can. Najee's on the injury report. I don't really want to play Brian Thomas without Trevor Lawrence, so I guess Najee is my answer by default, but he has to play. He has to practice first, and he didn't practice today. So the answer might unfortunately be, what's your third option out of these? Because I don't want to play Brian Thomas without Lawrence, and Najee's on the injury report. So we just don't know yet. We just don't know yet if he's going to play. It sounds like he's going to play, so you probably want to go with him, but he's banged up, and it's the Baltimore Ravens, so it's not a great situation. And I really don't want to play Thomas without Trevor Lawrence. David, I would go with Madison or Estime if you can. If you can grab one of those guys. I don't know who you have to drop. I don't know who you have to drop, but I would Madison or Estime should be fine as like a week 12 fill-in. They should be the starters. There are other I know there are other trade questions. Who can you get trading away Devontae and Josh Downs? You're looking to get a stud running back. Can you get James Conner? You're not going to get Bijan, but can you get James Conner? The running backs I want to target are, again, you're not going to get Bijan, but James Conner, one of either Rachaad White or Bucky Irving would be good. The Bucks have a good playoff schedule for running backs. You could try for Breece Hall, but he's difficult to trust with Braylon Allen and the bad Jets offense. And you could try for one of the Lions running backs. You could try for, you're probably not going to get Gibbs for Devontae and Downs, but you could try for Montgomery. I would try for Connor or Montgomery with those types of guys. I like James Conner's play. This is, of course, assuming that you might be in a good spot to get into the fantasy playoffs, and you say that you are. You're looking to get a stud running back or wide. I mean, I would look at James Conner. I know he's on a bye this week, but go look at his fantasy playoff schedule and tell me that doesn't look appealing. And I would try for one like a David Montgomery. Beautiful, beautiful schedule for the fantasy playoffs. The Lions' run game, not so much their passing offense. I don't want Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a sell for me. Amon-Ra is not a must sell, but he has some downside in the fantasy playoffs. Just looking at the schedule, and then Jamison Williams, as bullish as I was on him going into the season, I am not super excited about his fantasy playoff schedule. And I guess the same can be said for Sam Laporta, who has been mostly underwhelming this year and is now injured. So Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, buy. Anybody else on that Lions offense, sell. Amon-Ra, don't sell for nothing, obviously. But if you do end up holding him, we may need to temper expectations for the fantasy playoffs. So I would try for James Conner or David Montgomery. I doubt Jahmyr Gibbs can be traded for that, but you can try. You can definitely try. And Chuck, just real quick, you want just 2 years of production? I mean, you'll get 2 years of production if you trade for Tyreek. You'll get that, but that might be all you get. Whereas Liggett looks like he might emerge as a solid, he could be on the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 border, so to speak, with wide receiver 2 upside moving forward if Bryce Young continues to progress. So you might be getting 6 or 7 years of production from Liggett. But if you're just looking for 2 years, Tyreek can give you that. So if that is what is ultimately tipping the scales for you, then you can make the trade. I just think the points that you might necessarily be looking for next year are in the form of Liggett and that second round pick. That's all. And David, you're hopefully getting. We have to see about T. Higgins, of course. Did he practice today? Which, by the way, the Cincinnati Bengals, you may want to consider selling ahead of the fantasy playoffs. Their schedule is not good. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are playing lights out. They're playing incredible right now, but they do not have a good stretch in the fantasy playoffs. So T. Higgins obviously is a concern there as well. Did he practice today? I need to know. So if you have Cincinnati Bengals, I know it's a tough pill to swallow, but for the fantasy playoffs, consider selling high. And when I say selling high, you should be able to get really good stuff for something like Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase. And I'm talking about, I mean, you could try to do Chase for Jefferson straight up, especially with the Vikings offense and the current vibes. But I would expect that to bounce back, and I don't think their schedule is too terrible. T. Higgins, limited participant. All right, so he might come back. Probably Quentin Johnston is your other start, David. The Chargers have been they've been throwing the ball well, and Justin Herbert has been playing well. But more on your trade question, because I want to make sure I'm centered on trades tonight. You got offered Tyreek and Hawkinson for Breece or Mike Evans. I don't know who your tight end is, David. So if Hawkinson is an upgrade over, if Hawkinson is a big upgrade over whoever you're playing at tight end, I would trade Mike Evans for Tyreek and Hawkinson. I would keep Breece Hall. I know he's been frustrating, but if you're headed toward the fantasy playoffs, he has a good slate of games. At Jacksonville, beautiful. Home against the LA Rams, beautiful. On the road against Buffalo, a little more challenging, but they're not a shutdown defense against the run. So I would prefer to keep Breece Hall. You have Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid. Then no, so Hawkinson does nothing for you. Then Hawkinson doesn't do anything for you. You have McBride, and I know he's on bye this week, but Trey McBride has a beautiful fantasy playoff schedule. You want to rock with him. No, I would not, David. I would not. I would not do that trade. I would keep what you have. You have the tight ends that you need. You don't need to add any more tight ends. What's up, Nino? Good to see you. So no, David, I would not take that trade. I would not take either one of those trades. I would keep Breece Hall and I would keep Mike Evans. I think I have all questions answered. Again, for tonight, if you're just joining, or maybe I do have a ticker running, looking to avoid start-sit questions tonight. Let's save those for tomorrow and or Saturday. This is primarily, again, trade deadlines are fast approaching in your league, so I do want to cater this toward trade questions and dialogue and discussion and looking at fantasy playoff weeks and seeing who makes sense to maybe buy or sell based on schedules and trying to predict outcomes and all of that good stuff. So I am encouraging that we just try to limit it to trades. If you do have alternate questions, I can try to take a look at it, but I may not spend as much time on them as I normally would. And what's going on, MBM? Good to see you. I see Nino's got an offer here, so let's take a look. You were offered Connor and Otten for Chase Brown and Engram. Yes. Yes, if you can stomach the bye week situation. Now, Connor's on bye this week. Connor and Otten are both on bye this week. So, obviously, you're not going to have them. Chase Brown is on bye, I believe, next week. Engram had his bye week, but he might not have his quarterback for the rest of the way. And Otten, at this point, is a massive, massive upgrade over Engram regardless. Chase Brown, on paper, might be better in 2024 than James Conner. Might be. But he has a brutal playoff schedule, and Conner has one of the best playoff schedules. Nino, if you are in position to make the playoffs, if you are not struggling to secure a playoff spot, if you're 6-4, but you scored a lot of points, or you're 7-3, you're 8-2, if you have a good record and you're cruising toward the playoffs, you feel confident about your chances to make it, my answer is yes. My answer is yes. I would absolutely do this trade. James Conner is a target. He is a target James Conner is a target to acquire in a trade in all formats. His playoff schedule is fantastic. Home against New England, on the road against Carolina, on the road against the LA Rams. James Conner is an excellent trade acquisition for the fantasy playoffs. And then on top of that, do what you can, whether he's available on waivers or if maybe he's a stash on someone's bench. Also acquire Trey Benson. Get the handcuff, get the backup, completely secure that situation for yourself. So no matter what happens, you are prepared to capitalize on an elite playoff schedule. I say yes to do this trade, and on top of that, make room for Trey Benson once the trade is done. Make room for Trey Benson and do what you have to do to get Trey Benson. Secure the Cardinals' backfield. Their fantasy playoff schedule is fantastic. So yes, if you can make this trade, Nino, make it. James Conner is a buy for the fantasy playoffs. Cade Otton is a buy in general. Chase Brown isn't a sell, but Evan Engram is. So for me, I'm all the way in on this. And Brown does not have a good playoff schedule by the numbers. The Bengals are an offense that you're going to want to avoid. Home against, on the road against Tennessee. Bad for not a good matchup. Bad matchup for the opposing offense. Home against Cleveland. At least they're at home, but it's a division game, and Cleveland still has a pretty good defense. And then at home against Denver. Denver has a really good defense. Burrow is probably going to be fine, but we're maybe looking at like a floor game for him in these games as opposed to ceiling games like what we got on Thursday night last week against the Ravens. So for me, Cincinnati is an offense to avoid, generally speaking. So I'm good with this trade. I am good with that trade. And you have Ferguson for one more week. Then you can drop Ferguson, honestly, once Otten is back healthy. Or back from his bye week, excuse me. MVM, you were offered Sutton for Mike Evans. I don't think so. I don't think so. Tampa has a pretty solid playoff schedule. They're on the road against the Chargers, which is not the best. But Mike Evans is a stud, and I feel fine about him in even in negative matchups. Then they are on the road against the Cowboys, who their season is cooked. So that's a favorable matchup, even if Trayvon Diggs is suiting up for the Cowboys at that point, and they might be mailing it in for a good draft pick by then, and then therefore they're not playing. And then he's at home against Carolina, who he has eviscerated in his career. Sutton gets the Colts at home, and then the Chargers, and then the Bengals. That's not bad, but the Bucs is a little bit better. Oh, you own Sutton. You own Sutton. You were offered Evans for Sutton. Got it. Yes. Okay, then just flip around what I said. Sorry, when you said you were offered Sutton, I thought that meant you would be acquiring Cortland Sutton. If you're acquiring Mike Evans, then I'm good with that. You have London, who I feel good about for the fantasy playoffs. You have Dobbs, who I feel good about for the fantasy playoffs. The Packers have a great playoff schedule if it comes to you needing Romeo Dobbs. Nico is coming back. You already know what you're going to do with him. You're going to start him every week that he's active. And then Jennings looks like real solid depth. You can absolutely roll the dice on Mike Evans. Yes, I would do that trade. Baller's ball, and Mike Evans is a baller. Cortland Sutton's a good football player too, but Mike Evans is a certified baller, probably a first ballot Hall of Famer. Yeah, I'll take the chance on Mike Evans. The Broncos have a solid, at least their passing offense has a solid playoff schedule. I think the Bucs is a little better. It's a little better. All right. I kind of bounced around a little bit as far as teams with favorable playoff schedules versus teams who aren't. So I will go back down the list. So I'm buying Arizona Cardinals players, and I am buying Atlanta Falcons players. Just hit accept. Hell yeah. Nicely done. We got Mike Evans. There we go. Let me see. So the Baltimore Ravens, obviously incredible offense, right? Lamar Jackson's an MVP candidate. Actually, he's probably the MVP favorite. Derrick Henry is still one of the best running backs in football. Mark Andrews has reemerged as a top 6 option at tight end, probably for the rest of the season. Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman are up and down, but solid, reliable guys in 3 receiver sets, or in leagues that start 3 wide receivers. Zay Flowers is a regular starter, and Rashad Bateman is a viable depth option to have. Unfortunately, they do not have the best playoff schedule due to the Baltimore Ravens. They are on the road against the New York Giants week 15. Great. Good. Then at home, week 16 against Pittsburgh. Less than ideal, but obviously Derrick Henry is a monster, and, if you have him, you're starting him, but it's obviously a little dicey. And then on the road against Houston, not super ideal. So, Lamar Jackson is probably not going to be involved in too many trades. And if you try to acquire Lamar Jackson, you're probably talking about a situation where you're going to have to pay a shitload to acquire him. So maybe best to just avoid that situation. Same with Derrick Henry. He's probably just going to cost a little too much. He's probably going to cost just a little too much. And then their wide receivers, I would probably try to look to move on from them if possible. Giants are a good matchup. The Giants in Week 15 are a good matchup. Pittsburgh and Houston, not so much. Not so much. Houston is top 5 in the NFL against the pass. Pittsburgh has been a little bit leakier recently, and it is a home game for Baltimore, so that could prop up Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman a little bit more. Who the hell knows what we're getting from Deontay Johnson at that point, if anything at all. But that potentially muddies those waters even further if Deontay maybe starts to. I know it's hard to see that right now. We kind of got to with Deontay Johnson, and I'm not advocating for you to acquire Deontay or anything like that, but with him, we kind of got to maybe take the long view, try to see the forest through the trees. I hope I used that saying correctly just now. I have no idea if I did. What I'm trying to get at is Deontay's role absolutely could continue to grow in this Ravens offense, not to the point where he comes back to being fantasy relevant, but enough where he makes it a real annoying situation to deal with if you have Zay Flowers. That could be a guy that you maybe look to move off of for Darnell Mooney plus. You might not be able to get the plus, but based on the name recognition and the draft capital and all that stuff, it's worth a shot. It's worth a shot. I'll take one more, and then I'm going to take a quick look at one more offense, and then I'll take more questions. And then I'm happy to I'll slice this stream up a little bit, and try to send out a couple of smaller, maybe more digestible videos over the course of the rest of the week and next week. The Buffalo Bills, their playoff schedule. Again, we're looking at weeks 15 to 17 for each team. On the road against Detroit, that's good for the passing game, not so good for the run game. Home against New England, that's fine. That's fine for everybody. And then home against the New York Jets. Again, the Jets could be mailing it in at that point in the season. So while on paper it's not ideal, it might not be as scary of a matchup by the time we get to week 17. So 2 division games for Buffalo makes that a little weird. That game could be weird. And then on the road against Detroit, who is one of the best teams in the NFL. If not, they might be number one. Nevertheless, they are a defense that you can throw the ball on. So Josh Allen, it's okay. It's not great. It's okay. It's not great. If you have Josh Allen, I don't hate the idea, and I know this might sound crazy, but I don't hate the idea of trying to sell Josh Allen for something like Kyler Murray plus. Because Kyler has a beautiful playoff schedule and has been playing great. He's on bye this week, but Allen, I think, is on bye either next week or in the next couple of weeks anyway. So you're going to have to deal with it regardless. And if you sell Josh Allen for Kyler Murray, I guarantee you can get something else for that too. Just based on the fact that it's Josh Allen. You can get a good running back or a good wide receiver in that deal. Just something to think about. Food for thought. Food for thought. And then, honestly, James Cook might be a sell high as well. And again, I don't want to sound too crazy here, and don't do anything for the sake of just doing anything, or doing something. But the Bills do have, and they're a prolific, excellent offense, and you expect good things from a Josh Allen-led football team any given week. So it's totally fine to sit tight and rock with your Buffalo Bills if you have the Buffalo Bills, anybody on that offense, particularly Allen and James Cook. But especially as it pertains to Cook with that playoff schedule, the Lions on the road is brutal. The Patriots at home isn't bad. The Jets at home isn't great. It could be all right, but it's not great on paper. Cook might net you Connor plus. Just throwing it out there. Or try to offer Cook plus one of your wide receivers for, try to upgrade. Go to Bijan. Can you get Bijan? I know Bijan is currently the RB1 overall over the past month, but could you trade James Cook and a wide receiver 2 for Bijan? Kick the tires. kick the tires. So maybe consider getting creative with the Buffalo Bills. See if you can get a smorgasbord in return for guys like Allen and Cook. If you can't, then hold them. They're prolific pieces in an excellent offense, one of the best offenses in the NFL. Don't trade them just for the sake of trading them just because their playoff schedule looks a little less than ideal. But if you can get Josh Allen for Kyler Murray and an awesome wide receiver or an awesome running back, you might want to consider that. Can you upgrade and go from James Cook plus a good wide receiver to Bijan Robinson? Could you make that happen? If you can make that happen, entertain it. If you can't, then just keep the Buffalo Bills. But we are looking at a less than ideal playoff schedule for Buffalo. So again, not really taking start-sit questions this evening, but between, I'll just quickly say, come back later in the week if you can when we have practice reports and all that stuff. But tentatively, I would probably take Ladd McConkey against Ladd versus Jawan Jennings. I'll take Ladd McConkey against the Cincinnati Bengals. Justin Herbert's been playing really well. Do you try to trade Mason to the McCaffrey owner? Can you get Hopkins? Can you get Hopkins? Hopkins is I know he went nuclear in that Monday night game where he caught 2 touchdowns against the Bucs, and then I don't think he did all that much this past week. But Rashee Rice is not coming back, right? Xavier Worthy is still very much a rookie who is finding his way. It's Hopkins and Travis Kelce for Patrick Mahomes for the rest of the season. I mean, I am totally fine. I am totally fine with acquiring Hopkins and rolling the dice on him as a high upside wide receiver 3, borderline wide receiver 2 rest of the season. If you can get Hopkins for Mason, I would 100% do that. I would 100% do that. I don't know how feasible or viable it is, but Jordan Mason's going to be valuable to the person in your league who has Christian McCaffrey, so they may be willing to do it. I would start with Hopkins and go from there. If you can't get Hopkins, I'm not unopposed to either of Leggett or Adunze. Both actually have pretty good fantasy playoff schedules by the numbers. The problem with Adunze is, will Caleb Williams and that offense show any reason for us to believe in them? Because right now there is not. There is none. There is no reason to believe in the Bears offense. However, they get Minnesota, Detroit, and Seattle secondaries weeks 15 to 17, so that's pretty damn good. As far as Carolina, they get Dallas, Arizona, and Tampa Bay, and 2 of those games are at home. That's pretty damn good. I would start with Hopkins, but I wouldn't mind either one of those other receivers for Mason as well. You are doing the McCaffrey owner in your league a solid, but if Mason might not be giving you particularly anything anymore at this point, so you might as well move off of him if you can get a solid depth wide receiver. Yep. And then real quick, MVM, it's close, but I would go Daniels over Herbert. He's just the rushing upside Konami code. Philadelphia is a brutal matchup, but Jaden Daniels has been awesome this year. And generally speaking, primetime games, big time players perform in big time moments. There's no data or analysis there. It's just like Jaden Daniels is a baller playing in a massive game. I don't know that I would necessarily bet against him. You know what I mean? Herbert's been playing great, and it's a much better matchup if you prefer that. But I think I would just rock with Jaden Daniels. He's been so freaking good. Jennings versus Dobbs. I don't know. Are there any injuries in the Packers wide receiver core? It's also not a great matchup against the Bears. I'll take Jennings against Seattle. That's a really good matchup. So I went over gone on over a few. I just went over Buffalo. I briefly went over Carolina. The Panthers have a really good playoff stretch. So if you have Chuba Hubbard, hold. And if you can acquire Xavier Leggett for cheap, definitely look into that. And again, for everybody, this is not really a trade, but it is something to keep an eye on for the waiver wire. If you are unsettled at tight end, and that is to say you don't have any one of Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Brock Bowers, or Trey McBride, or Cade Otton, if you don't have those 6 names, I guess I'll throw Hawkinson in there as well. If you don't have those 7 names, pick up Jatavian Sanders. Pick up Jatavian Sanders. Make that shit happen tonight if you can. And you don't. If you have one of those 7 names at tight end, then don't worry about it. Kelce, Andrews, Kittle, Bowers, McBride, Otton, and Hawkinson. If those are one of your 7 tight ends, then fine. Anybody else, grab Jatavian Sanders. He's going to have low-end tight end 1 appeal rest of season. You heard it here first. So that's a good. So Carolina's in a good spot. We're obviously not picking Bryce Young up in 1 quarterback leagues. We're just not there yet. And I don't know that he's necessarily going to put up enough strong performances between now and week 15 for us to actually seriously consider that. But Chuba Hubbard, Xavier Leggett, Chuba Hubbard, hold if you have him. You're going to have to trade big if you want to try to get him, but he's got a good playoff schedule. And Xavier Leggett is probably worth adding as a fill-in to, if you need to expand a trade or any trade negotiations. Leggett looking like a really good fill-in any trades with a really good schedule. So I like Xavier Leggett as a fill-in for trades. Yeah. So Carolina's skill position's perfectly fine. Again, Chicago's skill position players are in a great spot. Maybe not DeAndre Swift at Minnesota against Detroit weeks 15 and 16, but those are secondaries that you can throw on. And then Seattle, their defense is not very good. Man, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, Cole Kmet, especially the pass catchers. It's a good playoff schedule. I just don't. Who the hell trusts the Bears offense right now? I don't. I can't imagine anybody else does either. So we may have to just let that one go. That's an example of we're not chasing the good matchups just because they're in a good spot. We have to be able to trust the offense as well. And right now, there is no reason to trust the Bears offense. So if you have a wide receiver for the Bears, you might as well hang on to them and hope that they figure things out because the fantasy playoff schedule is strong. But I am not going out of my way to acquire them. And honestly, DeAndre Swift, I don't know if anybody plays in Yahoo leagues. I don't know if you have your notifications turned on for Yahoo Sports or Yahoo Fantasy. They put an article out today that listed DeAndre Swift as a buy candidate. I would actually probably tell you I think he's a sell candidate. And maybe now that Yahoo pumped him up a little bit, you might even be able to get a little bit more for him in an offer. Those first 2 playoff weeks for DeAndre Swift on the road against Minnesota and at home against Detroit, I want nothing to do with that. I want nothing to do with those matchups. At home against Seattle is pretty damn good, but you got to get there first. And he has brutal matchups along the way. DeAndre Swift is a sell for me if you can move off of him and get, say, James Conner. Again, I'll go back to I'm going to keep going back to James Conner. He is a buy in this trade deadline season that is upon us ahead of the fantasy playoffs. Love James Conner as a trade deadline acquisition. Let's see. And then the handcuff questions do pertain to trades, and as far as shaping your roster for the fantasy playoffs. So I'm happy to take them. Yeah, you can drop Taysom for Jalen Wright to just secure the handcuff MVM. That's totally fine. You have Travis Kelce, so you have no need for Taysom Hill. you're never going to start him over Kelsey. So that's fine. That's fine. And if Mostert is out there, if Mostert is out there, I would probably prefer to grab Mostert. But if he's not, then Jalen Wright is a perfectly fine handcuff for Achane. Yep, I'm good with that. You don't need to trade for Debo. I am not super bullish on acquiring Debo anyway. I'm really not. He's approaching highly volatile territory as far as how much we can rely on him. Not just with, his own play, but the emergence of Ricky Pearsall. Jawan Jennings is a constant in this offense. And obviously, Christian McCaffrey just came back. I mean, we're looking at situations where there might be weeks where we only get 7 or 8 points from Deebo Samuel. There will be weeks where we can maybe expect 20 points. He's cleared 14 points in half PPR 3 times this year, but it hasn't happened since week 6. So no, you do not need to acquire Deebo, whether you have Jennings or not. Deebo is not he's not a screaming target for me. With the trade deadline approaching. He just isn't. He's become highly volatile is what has happened. Brian Thomas's worth on the trade market, low. Mac Jones stinks, man. He's not good. And he's going to submarine an excellent rookie season for Brian Thomas if he remains the starter. There is hope, apparently, that Trevor Lawrence can return for the Jacksonville Jaguars after their bye week next week. There is that possibility remains, but if they lose these next couple of weeks, well, this week, their bye week is next week. If they lose this week and they continue to fall further out of the playoff race and Lawrence is banged up, they might shut him down. It's certainly possible that they shut him down. He needs to play because he hasn't proven anything, respectfully. He needs to play. Plus, he just got paid a fat contract, so he should be out there if he's anything close to 100%. But that remains to be seen whether that'll actually happen or not. Regardless, we need a healthy Lawrence for Brian Thomas to have a viable opportunity for fantasy purposes. And if he's not out there, we can't rely on him. If Lawrence isn't out there, then we can't rely on him. Jacksonville's playoff schedule on top of that is the New York Jets, on the road against Vegas, not scary, but then at home against Tennessee. That is not a great playoff schedule as it is. The Jets are an elite passing defense. The Titans are they're gettable. They're gettable, but they're pretty shut down. And they've been even better in the past couple of weeks. So I'm actually looking to avoid the Jacksonville Jaguars anyway. If you have Brian Thomas in redraft, in Dynasty you hold, obviously. And in keeper leagues you hold as well. But if this is a straight redraft league, if you have Brian Thomas, it might hurt. It's going to sting because he's been awesome, but you might want to sell. You might want to look to sell. His playoff schedule isn't strong, and we don't know if he's going to have his quarterback for the rest of the year. I would consider moving on if you have him, and I would not look to acquire if you were considering it. And Brian Thomas is awesome. Keeper leagues and dynasty leagues, yeah, sure. Trade for him. Straight redraft, I don't think I would. I don't think I would. And if I have him in straight redraft, I would maybe be looking to move him. Trade Flowers and DJ Moore for Devontae Smith and George Pickens. I think I'm good with this. I think I would be okay with this. Pittsburgh is a team we haven't highlighted yet. It is not a good schedule. It is not a good playoff schedule for them. On the road against the Eagles, week 15. On the road against Baltimore, week 16. Actually, that is a good matchup. And then at home against Kansas City is not the best, but at least they're at home. The Steelers are. That's Christmas Day, by the way. For anybody keeping track or keeping score. The Steelers and the Chiefs play on Christmas Day, week 17. I am okay with acquiring Pickens and Devontae Smith for Flowers and DJ Moore. Again, Flowers feels a little volatile. I don't love their playoff schedule, and I wouldn't be shocked. It might not happen this week, but by the time we hit the fantasy playoffs, it's possible Deontay Johnson has a larger role in that Ravens offense, and that makes their wide receivers more annoying to own than they already are. So I don't mind moving off of Zay Flowers. Like the past couple of weeks are a microcosm of what Zay Flowers can give you. Week 9 against Denver in a bad matchup, he was the wide receiver 2 on the week. 5 catches, 127 yards, 2 touchdowns. Probably not going to replicate 2 touchdowns in a single game again, but you never know. The very next week in a glorious matchup against the Bengals, he catches 4 passes for 34 yards. He's very up and down. He will give you wide receiver 1 weeks half the time, but the other half of the time, he is not playable. Zay Flowers has been a top 12 wide receiver 3 times this year. He's also been outside the top 50 4 times this year. And with Deontay Johnson potentially getting an expanded role as the weeks progress, he is absolutely, Flowers is a player that I would like to move if possible. So yeah, I'm good with that. This one's even better. If you can make that happen, if you can trade Flowers and Ladd for Nico freaking Collins, then run, don't walk to make that trade happen. 100%. Nico is matchup proof. We don't even need to worry about looking at his playoff schedule. I don't care if it's against the Monstars on the moon. We are playing Nico Collins in any scenario where he's healthy. If you can make that trade happen, 100% do it. 100% do it. If you can, I'll start with get rid of Tyreek because it's a trade related question. I mean, sure, but for what? You know, what can you conceivably get at this point? Because we can't ask for top dollar. We can't ask for top dollar for Tyreek Hill. He hasn't. All we have right now with Tyreek Hill is his name, but the production just simply hasn't been there, and his schedule is awful for the fantasy playoffs. On the road against Houston, at home against San Francisco, on the road against Cleveland. Forget that. Forget it, man. So, yeah, I guess if you can, to that point, if you can move off of Tyreek, sure. Yeah, I'll do. I would if you can. I don't know what you can get. I don't know if you potentially have something on the table, but I would look to do it. Yeah, Tyreek's like the wide receiver 40 this year. And again, I know Tua has missed time. I understand. But Tua returning has so far not helped. Yeah, if you can move off of Tyreek Hill, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. Jaden Reed? I'm not... Okay. Stick with me for a second. You might come off as appearing a little greedy, but this is a name where could you ask for that little extra piece, that RB4 or 5 on your trade partner's bench? Could you squeeze that little extra piece out of the person who you would acquire Jaden Reed for? Can you get that running back 4 as just that pot sweetener? Because it's Tyreek freaking Hill, man. This is how you sell it, right? This is the used car salesman, shtick or spiel, whatever you want to go. It's Tyreek freaking Hill, man. He's a stud. He'll get it figured out. Tua's back. They're going to be fine. He caught a touchdown this past week. He's on, that gravy train is rolling. That's how you sell it. Can you squeeze that one extra piece? Because Jaden Reed is not on that level of, I'm just throwing out other wide receivers that were drafted in round 1 this year. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown. Jaden Reed's not on that level of those players. So you could try to finagle that. Regardless, I'm in on this. I am interested in Jaden Reed because, and this is again assuming if you are in good shape for the playoffs, If you're not in good shape for the playoffs, then this is a slightly tougher sell. But if you're in good shape for the playoffs, the Green Bay Packers have an absolutely beautiful fantasy playoff schedule. They are on the road against Seattle week 15. Funnel. They are bottom half of the league against the pass, and they've been even worse than their season averages for the past 3 or 4 weeks. So recently they've not been that good at all. Then they get home games against the New Orleans Saints and the Minnesota Vikings. That is as good as it gets for an opposing wide receiver. Or for a wide receiver going up against those defenses. So, yes. Can you get Jaden Reed plus a little extra? If you can, I would smash accept. If you can, I would smash accept. This is assuming that you're in good shape for the playoffs. Hopefully you are. If anybody has, if anybody has a trade situation where you need to win games now, if you're not good for the fantasy playoffs, let me know. Because I'm specifically right now looking at playoff schedules and playoff matchups and how best to mold your roster for the fantasy postseason. That's what we want. Because I assume trade deadlines are fast approaching in your league. You got to win now. All right. So the other issue here, of course, with Tyreek Hill is that he is dealing with a wrist injury. That apparently he's dealing with a torn ligament and he's not practicing today. Go figure. He's got the Raiders this week. Patriots, Packers, Jets. These are the matchups that he needs to go up against in the playoffs. Raiders, Patriots, Packers, Jets. 2 of those 4 are not bad. Jaden Reed, on the other hand, gets the Bears this week. Not a good matchup. Then the 49ers, not a good matchup. Then the Dolphins, not a good matchup. But then he gets the Lions. That is a good matchup. I think I would wait. I think I would wait. I don't love Tyreek's strength of schedule in this upcoming slate of games, but I actually dislike Jaden Reed's strength of schedule in this upcoming slate of games even more. I prefer Tyreek right now, but I would prefer Jaden Reed for week 15. So if you need to win now, maybe just keep Tyreek. Obviously, we're grasping at straws with Tyreek Hill at this point, but his strength of schedule is a little bit better than Jaden Reed's. If you can get something else for Tyreek that has a little bit more, another wide receiver that has a more favorable schedule is good, is on Jaden Reed's level. Like, could you get Pickens? I know he's balling out recently, but could you get Pickens? Could you try to get Cooper Kupp? Could you ask for DK Metcalf? Those are some other names I might be a little bit more interested in the short term. What's going on, Jay? Good to see you. Would I trade Neighbors and Brian Robinson for A.J. Brown? Damn. Remind me the rest of your roster, Jay, because you would be giving up 2 pieces that I actually quite like to potentially acquire for the stretch run. The New York Giants, and of course, again, I don't want to go too far ahead, but if you're good for the playoffs, if you're in good shape to make the playoffs, Jay, the New York Giants have Baltimore at home, Atlanta on the road, and Indianapolis at home. That's a pretty damn good playoff schedule for Malik Neighbors. The Eagles have Pittsburgh. That's not a great matchup. On the road against Washington, that could be okay. And then at home against Dallas, that's going to be a good matchup by the numbers. So Neighbors' playoff schedule, A.J. Brown is a baller, obviously, but Neighbors' playoff schedule is probably better. And then Washington has New Orleans on the road, the Eagles at home. That's not great, but Atlanta at home. 2 of those 3 are really good, especially that Week 15 matchup on the road against New Orleans. Those are some good playoff schedules. Outside of having to play the Eagles, obviously, for the second time, they're playing tomorrow night in Philly. They get them, the Washington gets them week 17 at home. That's not great. But week 15 against New Orleans and week 17 against Atlanta, those are good matchups for Brian Robinson. So those two, their playoff schedule overall is solid, especially neighbors. If you can get a depth running back in return, I don't know who the other, to make it an even 2-for-2 swap. Doesn't have to be as good as Brian Robinson. You're just getting running back depth in the trade to supplant the loss of Brian Robinson. You have Taylor, Henry, and Jacobs. That's pretty damn good. And you have Downs, who maybe took a hit with Anthony Richardson returning to the starting lineup. If you start, forgive me, Jay, I don't remember, Jay, if you start 3 wide receivers or if you start 2. If you only start 2 wide receivers, then I don't think I would do this. But if you do start 3 wide receivers, then I'm a little bit more intrigued. And if you can make this an even 2-for-2 swap where you get the last running back on their bench, even if that's what it, if that's all you can ask for to complete this trade, then I'm more okay with it. If you only start 2 wide receivers, I'm not as bullish about it, because you probably start Jefferson and Nico anyway. But if you start 3, then you can start Jefferson, Nico, and A.J. Brown and still start Taylor and Henry at running back with Jacobs as like an elite option off of the bench. And if you can get like a depth end of the roster stash running back to make it an even 2-for-2 swap, then I'm good with it. Yep. All right, I think I have all of the questions so far. I didn't ask Herbert versus Stroud or answer Herbert versus Stroud, but I would definitely play Herbert this week. He's just playing better, and it's a good matchup against the Bengals. So I'll take Justin Herbert. Houston has Dallas. That's not too bad, but Herbert's playing better than Stroud right now, so I'll take Herbert. I think I got all the questions, so I'm going to continue to briefly run through any other teams that I haven't covered just yet. And I'll try to slice this up to make it a little bit more digestible where it makes sense for some shorter videos moving forward starting tomorrow. But basically, I'm buying Arizona Cardinals. I'm buying Atlanta Falcons. I'm not really buying the Baltimore Ravens, but I would look to sell Zay Flowers if you can. Buffalo, neutral. James Cook is not a bad idea to try to move off of, and if you could package him in a wide receiver for like a Bijan Robinson, I would look to do that. Carolina has a good playoff schedule, so Chuba Hubbard, Xavier Legette, Jatavian Sanders as a waiver wire pickup. I like those guys. Chicago, great schedule, but I don't trust the offense, so I'm not going out of my way to acquire any of them. Cincinnati, bad matchups. If you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, you might just need to grin and bear it. Same with Chase Brown. But if you can get top dollar in a deal for any one of those guys, you may want to consider it. Their schedule is not good for the playoffs. Cleveland, it's not great. The offense is hard to trust as it is, but the playoff schedule makes it even tougher. Home against Kansas City, bad matchup. Home against Cincinnati, not a bad matchup, but it is a division game. And then at least it's 3 straight home games. But home against Miami, their pass defense is stellar. And their run defense isn't too bad. It's no slouch. I would not be looking necessarily to acquire Cleveland players for the fantasy playoffs. Dallas, their season's in the toilet. At Carolina, against Tampa Bay at home, and then at Philly. Weeks 15 and 16 are beautiful matchups for the Dallas Cowboys fantasy playoff schedule. I just don't trust them anymore. I barely trust CeeDee Lamb. I don't trust Rico Dowdle as much as I've been a Rico guy this year. I don't trust Jake Ferguson, not without Dak. And with their season spiraling out, that's a tough sell. That's a tough sell. Let's see. The Denver Broncos, not bad. honestly. Home against the Colts, on the road against the Chargers, that's not great. And then on the road against Cincinnati, that's not bad. That's not bad. The problem is for the Broncos is who's the running back that we can trust. I guess it's Audric Estime. And then Cortland Sutton is a rock-solid investment for the fantasy playoffs, not for somebody like Mike Evans. I would rather have like Mike Evans in MBM's case where you had that trade on the table. But Sutton is looking solid. Indianapolis, great matchup. On the road against the Chargers, not a good matchup. So that might be one to avoid. But on the road against Cincinnati, week 17, that's not too bad for Cortland Sutton. The ancillary wide receivers are difficult to trust. And then I guess Audric Estime is not a bad stash. But I don't know that I would necessarily trade assets for him. Not yet. Not yet. I think I already went over the Detroit Lions. I sort of covered, but I'll cover it again. Home against Buffalo, week 15. On the road against Chicago, week 16. On the road against San Francisco, week 17. That is bad. I don't want Jared Goff. Amon-Ra is a hold, but if you can sell him for another premium wide receiver, Chase. Well, maybe not Chase because his matchups, his playoff schedule isn't great either. AJ Brown, Nico Collins, whatever, somebody in that collection. If you can flip Amon-Ra for one of those two, I don't hate that idea. I don't want Jameson Williams. I don't want Sam Laporta. I would take their running backs, although that week 16 matchup on the road against Chicago is not super ideal. Matchup against San Francisco isn't super ideal either. So maybe I would take, I don't know, maybe I would take Gibbs in PPR leagues. Montgomery is a little bit of a tougher sell, but I do think he will come through with volume. And it's a great Lions offense. And at some point, you just have to trust and believe in good offenses. Mentioned this already. Green Bay across the board. Acquire Jordan Love if you can. Acquire Josh Jacobs if you can. And acquire their wide receivers. Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. Their matchups are as good as it gets. Seattle, New Orleans, Minnesota. That is a beautiful playoff schedule. Trade for Green Bay Packer players. Their matchups are good across the board. Maybe Josh Jacobs has a tough time at home against Minnesota, and they have, their tough run defense, but it is still a home game for an offense that is worth buying into and believing in. So I'm willing to roll those dice. Plus, his matchups on the way to get there, week 15 and 16 against Seattle and New Orleans, are so good. Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Tucker Kraft, all of these guys are buys for the fantasy playoffs. Buy the Green Bay Packers. You may want to sell the Houston Texans, but maybe, Joe Mixon, obviously, you probably need to keep rocking with, but it is not a good slate of playoff schedule games for Houston. Miami on the road against Kansas City and at home against Baltimore. I'm not a fan of that. Nico Collins should be fine in those scenarios, especially week 17 championship week against the leaky Baltimore secondary. But Miami and Kansas City, that's tough. That is tough. Still, Nico is a bulletproof stud. Acquire him if you can. Tank Dell is a little less enticing with these with this slate of games, admittedly. Indianapolis, I'm probably trying to avoid this situation outside of Jonathan Taylor, but at Denver, home against Tennessee, that's not great. On the road against the Giants, there's nothing scary about that, but these pass catchers are volatile with Anthony Richardson in the lineup. We don't know how well he's going to play. We don't know what things are going to look like after his hiatus a couple weeks on the bench, and that playoff schedule is pretty bad. On the road against Denver, not good. Home against Tennessee, not good. On the road against the Giants, not bad, but you got to get there first. The Colts may not help you do that. Maybe outside of Jonathan Taylor. The Kansas City Chiefs at Cleveland, week 15. That's not great. Week 16 at home against Houston. It's a home game, but that's not great. And then week 17 on the road against Pittsburgh. That's not great. Travis Kelce, just keep him because tight ends are so difficult to find anyway. So you might as well just keep him unless you can get another top 6 tight end for him. Bowers, Andrews, Kittle, McBride, Otten. Outside of that, I would probably just keep Travis Kelce. But it is a tough slate of games. DeAndre Hopkins, these are some tough matchups, but he does get a revenge game against Houston week 16, so that's not bad. And then the running backs are going to be difficult to trust. Isaiah Pacheco will be coming back from a fractured leg. Those are not good matchups for him, and they're probably going to they'll be ramping him up for the playoffs, and he'll be difficult to trust. He's going to eat into Kareem Hunt's volume, who does have a revenge game against the Cleveland Browns, but I don't know that I'm necessarily relying on Kareem Hunt in these bad matchups with Isaiah Pacheco back in the lineup and getting work. Xavier Worthy is a dart throw, and it's difficult to trust him in these matchups. And Patrick Mahomes, if there is any value that he has in one quarterback leagues, trade him now while you still can. We do not want to start him in any of these matchups. Superflex leagues, you have no choice. One quarterback leagues, that's not a good fantasy playoff schedule for Patrick Mahomes. Move off of him if you can while there's still time. The Las Vegas Raiders, Jacoby Myers is looking good. Week 15 against Atlanta, Week 16 against Jacksonville. Those are 2 home games. And then Week 17 on the road against New Orleans. That's a dome game for the Raiders. The problem is their offense stinks. Gardner Minshew or Desmond Ridder, no thanks. Alexander Mattison or Zamir White, no thanks. Brock Bowers, stud. You just keep rocking with him in your lineup and do absolutely nothing if you have him. That's a beautiful playoff schedule. Jacoby Myers, that would be the guy to consider trying to buy. If you're looking for some wide receiver help, Jacoby Myers is going to cost a little bit more than he has in recent than he would have at the start of the season. He's been coming on really strong the past couple of weeks, especially with Devontae Adams' departure out of Vegas. So he's probably going to cost a little bit more than a guy of his caliber normally would, but he's worth kicking the tires on for that playoff schedule. If you need a wide receiver and you're looking to maybe go bargain shopping, I say bargain with quotes because Jacoby Myers has been playing really well recently. He might no longer be a bargain, but he might still be viewed as a depth wide receiver on name recognition. You might be able to get a decent deal for Jacoby Myers if you're looking for some wide receiver help for the fantasy playoffs. He's got a really good playoff schedule. The Rams, you might want to move off of the LA Rams, to be honest. On the road against San Francisco, on the road against the Jets, at home against Arizona isn't bad, but those first 2 playoff matchups for the Rams are pretty brutal. On the road against the 49ers, and then on the road, which is a revenge game for San Francisco, for what it's worth. The Rams upset the 49ers earlier this year. And then on the road against the Jets, that is a West Coast team traveling east for what I assume is an early game. Don't love that. Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. This is a bad stretch of games for them, or a bad stretch of matchups anyway. Kyron Williams has been a stud. You may not have a choice. You may have to rock with him, but consider selling any of those guys for super top dollar in straight redraft leagues. You should be able to get a pretty penny for any of them. Do you trade Adams and Swift for Metcalf? Can you get a depth running back in return for that trade? But that being said, I'm interested. He's past his bye week. Is he practicing? Is DK Metcalf practicing? Let's take a look, because he's missed a couple of weeks. Is DK Metcalf practicing? Full practice on Wednesday for DK Metcalf. Yeah. Yeah, and I think he has a good playoff schedule. I hope you're in good position to make the playoffs. He does. The Packers, the Vikings, the Bears, that's not great week 17, but those first 2 matchups are good. At home against Green Bay, at home against Minnesota. That's a good playoff. That's a good start to the playoff schedule for DK Metcalf. Yeah, can you squeeze a depth running back out of that trade to make it an even 2 for 2? especially because you're giving up 2 pretty good pieces for a guy who's been injured for the past couple of weeks. Can you get a running back in return to supplant the loss of DeAndre Swift? Make it an even 2-for-2 swap? If you can, I'm in. I would want to acquire DK Metcalf and trade away Adams and Swift. But Adams is coming off a strong performance, and Swift is a starting caliber running back who has had a pretty good year to this point. I don't mind moving off of either one of these guys, but I would use these as selling points to try to get a running back in return. Can you get a running back and make this an even 2-for-2 swap in addition to acquiring DK? If you can, then I say yes. If you can, then I say yes, do it. Yep. If you can, yeah. Add a running back to that trade, and I say do it. Even if it's a depth guy, whoever the depth guy is, like whoever the last guy is on their bench, let's try to make that happen. Let's see. Where did I leave off? The Rams have a tough playoff schedule. The Chargers don't have a bad playoff schedule. Tampa Bay, Denver, New England. That Week 16 Denver game could be tough. But Tampa Bay is a pass funnel. So Justin Herbert, if you picked him up in one quarterback leagues, hold. He's playing well, and he's got a good Tampa Bay Week 15. That's a great start if you're playing in the wild card round or the first round of the fantasy playoffs. Herbert's looking solid. Same can be said for Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer. That's a good start, Tampa Bay. Dobbins remains a hold. Gus Edwards is worth a pickup. I like that. Denver, that's tougher. They've got a really good defense all across the board, so your Chargers are going to be difficult to trust Week 16. But Week 17 against New England, it is on the road, so that's a little tough. There's a lot of West Coast teams coming east Week 17. The Chargers are coming east for a game, for a Week 17 game. The Rams, not the Rams. Who else is going east? Denver is going east. Arizona. No, not Arizona. They're going to the Rams. There's a couple other teams, I feel like. There's more. Dallas, that doesn't necessarily count. Vegas goes to New Orleans. Yeah, there are some West Coast teams or Western-ish teams coming east for early games championship week. Something to keep in mind. So as far going back to the Chargers, Week 17 on the road against New England, they have to travel east, presumably for an early game. That's not a great spot, and it could be cold. But it's not a scary matchup by the numbers. New England is beatable on the ground. They're beatable on the ground, and I think they're a plus matchup through the air. Yeah, they're a little tougher through the air, but they can be had. They're not a shutdown unit. Justin Herbert, Ladd McConkey, not bad trade candidates. Not bad trade candidates that you could probably acquire for cheap. And in one quarterback leagues, if you grabbed Justin Herbert, you might as well just hold. Again, Miami, bad playoff schedule. If you can sell Tyreek Hill and salvage him, and you don't need the win now, you can set yourself up for the fantasy playoffs. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, whatever you can get, it might be worth at this point. Maybe wait one more week and see if either one of them can finally pop off and have a strong game and maybe sell high. But the Dolphins do not have a good playoff schedule, so I would look to move off of them. In straight redraft. Keeper, dynasty, no. And obviously, Devon Achane, keeper leagues, dynasty leagues is a strong hold. But Devon Achane, could you trade Devon Achane for Bijan Robinson? I would try to kick the tires on that. The Minnesota Vikings, their offense is tough to trust right now, but they do have good matchups in Week 16 and Week 17 at Seattle and home against Green Bay. Week 15 at home against Chicago is less than ideal, but Justin Jefferson is a baller. Aaron Jones is a baller, and it's a revenge game against Green Bay Week 17. So I'm okay with acquiring Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones. TJ Hawkinson might be a difficult guy to get because of the scarcity of good tight ends, and they don't have a great matchup in the first game of the fantasy playoffs against Chicago, but they've got good matchups week 16 and week 17. You could try to try to trade if you have like an Amon-Ra St. Brown or a Jamar Chase. Try to flip them for Justin Jefferson straight up. Jefferson's got a beautiful playoff schedule compared to those two. New England, I mean, actually, their schedule is kind of tough, and their team is difficult to trust in general. Ramondre Stevenson might be a decent sell. At Arizona, at Buffalo, home against the Chargers. That is not a great playoff schedule for the New England Patriots. Drake May has breathed life into this offense, but that is not a great slate of matchups. Ramondre Stevenson, it might be worth seeing what you could get for Ramondre Stevenson before the trade deadline. The New Orleans Saints also in dire straits on offense. Home against Washington, week 15. On the road against Green Bay, week 16. At home against Las Vegas, week 17. This is perfectly fine to keep rocking with Alvin Kamara. And I guess Taysom Hill if you are unsettled at tight end. I guess Marquez Valdez-Scantling gets a revenge game in there against the Packers. I don't know that I necessarily trust that. And then, of course, we have to see what the status is of Chris Olave, but it's possible that he doesn't come back this year, and I'm not looking to buy Chris Olave while he is on injured reserve, recovering from a string of concussions. So, outside of Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill in unsettled tight end situations, there's not a whole lot to get excited about with the New Orleans offense. The Giants, Malik Neighbors is worth a buy. Maybe not Tyrone Tracy. Oh, Tyrone Tracy might not be bad. I mean, this could be an offense that just completely goes in the toilet with Drew Lock at quarterback. But Baltimore's secondary is beatable. Atlanta's secondary is beatable. And Indianapolis' secondary is beatable. Malik Neighbors is worth trading for if you can make it happen. If the person in your league who has Malik Neighbors is worried about Drew Lock, is worried about the offense, see what it'll take to acquire Malik Neighbors. He has a beautiful playoff schedule. Tyrone Tracy a little bit tougher. That Baltimore matchup week 15 is brutal. Atlanta week 16 isn't bad. Atlanta week 16 isn't bad, and Indianapolis week 17 is quite good. So Tyrone Tracy is also worth checking in on if you need some running back help for the fantasy playoffs, but don't necessarily plan to rely on him week 15 against Baltimore. That's not a great matchup. The Jets have a beautiful schedule. They're just difficult to trust. At Jacksonville, home against the Rams, at Buffalo. That's a good spot for Breece Hall. That's a good spot for Garrett Wilson. Those are good spots for Devontae Adams. They're just difficult to trust. Maybe you can take advantage of that and acquire a New York Jet or two for pennies on the dollar relative to what their cost would have maybe been going into the season. They do have a good playoff schedule. Jacksonville, they're a funnel on defense all the way around. The Rams, they are a funnel all the way around on defense. The Bills are middle of the pack. They're not awful, but they're not great. They're middle of the pack, both against the run, against the pass. So Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, either one should be perfectly fine week 17 against the Bills. Don't mind the Jets' playoff schedule. The Eagles, their offense is humming, but they do get a tough matchup in the first round of the playoffs, the fantasy playoffs against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So tough to trust A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon in that situation, but they'll be at home, and they are firing on all cylinders right now. If it keeps up, you'll fire them up with confidence. And then at Washington and home against Dallas, the Eagles' skill position players are going to be difficult pieces to acquire because they're all playing well right now. You're going to have to pay top dollar to even try to kick the tires on any one of them. But I don't hate the idea of trying to acquire somebody like Devontae Smith, who flies under the radar occasionally. He did so again this past week with A.J. Brown's return. So he's a little volatile, but these are the matchups where you could see him coming through. Home against Pittsburgh, A.J. Brown's going to see Joey Porter. That might mean Devontae Smith has a more favorable matchup in that game. At Washington, that game might be a back-and-forth competitive game all the way through. Devontae Smith is more viable in competitive games all the way through to the final whistle. And then at Dallas, that's a tougher sell. The Eagles might not have to do a whole lot to win that game, so you may not be able to rely on him week 17, but Devontae Smith week 15 and 16 could be relative to what his cost normally would be. You might be able to get him on a bit of a discount after a down performance this past week. Weeks 15 and 16 are looking good for him. And then you're starting your Eagles and any other, in any other situation regardless. Pittsburgh, again, going right down the list alphabetically. They are on the road against Philly. Not ideal for any of their skill position guys. At Baltimore, that's great for George Pickens and the passing game in general, but not good for Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren. And then home against Kansas City, that's also not good for the run game. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are sells. Excuse me. I would look to sell Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. That playoff schedule is awful. I would look to buy George Pickens, who is balling out right now with Russell Wilson. So you're going to have to pay top dollar. But he's probably going to be worth the price of admission. George Pickens is balling out. Russell Wilson has elevated him to new levels. Philadelphia, week 15, that is a tough matchup, and he will be difficult to trust that week. But Baltimore and Kansas City, it's easier to throw on those teams than it is to run on them. I don't mind trying to acquire somebody like George Pickens. But I would sell the Pittsburgh Steelers running backs. San Francisco, I mean, you could try to trade for Christian McCaffrey, but if you have him, you've waited this long, regardless of playoff schedules, you might as well just keep him. And if you are looking to trade him, I mean, you better get something really damn good because you waited a long time to hold on to him. He gets the Rams week 15 funnel. Dolphins week 16, tough matchup, but it's Christian McCaffrey. Week 17, the Detroit Lions, brutal matchup by the numbers, but it's a home game and it's Christian McCaffrey. It's two of those three matchups are good for the 49ers pass catchers. The one issue being week 16 against the Dolphins. So you may have a hard time trusting Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall week 16. They are all viable weeks 15 and 17. The problem is figuring out who will underperform from that group. So San Francisco's situation is fluid. I wouldn't call them players that I want to buy or necessarily give away. But if you can sell somebody like Deebo Samuel for top dollar, that might be worth looking into. Because while the matchups are good, other players in this offense have emerged, and McCaffrey is back. So Deebo might be worth exploring what you can get for him. Seattle has good matchups weeks 15 and 16, home against Green Bay, home against Minnesota. Their passing game should be just fine. Kenneth Walker is good enough to come through in bad situations, but he has some bad matchups. Minnesota's run defense week 16 and Chicago's defense on the road week 17. Kenneth Walker is the type of dude where if you have him, he is in your lineup, but we may have to lower expectations those 2 weeks. I am in on buying somebody like DK Metcalf, though, for weeks 15 and 16. Packers and Vikings, you can beat those guys through the air. Chicago, a little bit of a tougher matchup. DK Metcalf is a guy I want to buy. Maybe not Tyler Lockett and Smith and Jigba, but I do want to buy DK Metcalf if I don't have him. Those are two good matchups to start the fantasy playoffs. I want the Bucks. Chargers, tough matchup, but Dallas and Carolina to end the fantasy season for them, week 16 and 17. I want Baker Mayfield. I want Mike Evans. I want Cade Otton. I want Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. That's not a great matchup week 15 against the Chargers, but at least it's a dome game with nice weather, no concerns. It's not a great matchup, but the Bucs have been an awesome offense. And then Dallas and Carolina, yeah, I want my Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If anybody's worried about the Bucs backfield, try to trade for those guys. Try to trade for Rachaad White. Try to trade for Bucky Irving. If anybody's worried about Mike Evans coming back from the hamstring, trade for him. If somebody has Cade Otton and another stud tight end and you don't have a stud tight end, try to get Cade Otton. I want to acquire Tampa Bay Buccaneers players. Yes, that matchup against the Chargers isn't great, but the Bucs offense has been really good this year. And their Week 16 and 17 opponents are looking like really plus premium matchups. So I want to trade for Tampa Bay players. Tennessee, I mean, if you can get Calvin Ridley, your window of opportunity is closing fast, but that's an excellent slate of matchups that he has for the fantasy playoffs. Week 15, Cincinnati. Week 16 on the road against Indianapolis. Week 17 on the road against Jacksonville. Get Calvin Ridley if you can. Get Calvin Ridley if you can. Honestly, get Tony Pollard if you can too. Don't trade those guys. Keep those guys. And finally, Washington at New Orleans. You want to start your Washington players against all your Washington players against New Orleans Week 15. Week 16 is a bugaboo against Philly. That's a brutal matchup for their entire offense, but they'll be at home, so you feel better about their prospects. And then Week 17 at home against Atlanta. Nothing scary about that defense. Washington Commanders, if Brian Robinson, if anybody's worried about him, maybe wait a week if the trade deadline for your week is Week 12. Wait after this Thursday night game. He's got a tough matchup against Philly. You might be able to buy low on him and rock with him for the rest of the season, having returned from the injury that cost him a couple of games, and they're getting past the Thursday night game after this week. If your trade deadline is Week 12 and you're looking for running back help, Brian Robinson might not have a great game tomorrow night. You might be able to try to kick the tires on him for pennies on the dollar. Yep. Brian Robinson is a trade target if your deadline is Week 12 and he has a bad game tomorrow night. Something to consider. All right. Just did a rapid fire cover over each NFL team's fantasy playoff schedule and guys that I like. I will try to timestamp this stream as best I can. I think it might be a little bit easier for me to slice up these videos with some of the highlights and make them a little bit more digestible, smaller videos for your consumption pleasure over the course of the rest of the week and into next week. So again, if you have any trade questions between now and whenever your deadline is, just let me know. I think that will about do it for me this evening. I see a start-sit question here. I mean, I don't remember who the matchups are for this week, admittedly. The Falcons get Denver. That's not a great matchup. The Lions get Jacksonville. That is a great matchup. The Jets get the Colts. That is a great matchup. And Nico's coming back. I would sit London. He's probably going to see Patrick Surtain on the road. Give me Gibbs, give me Brees, give me Collins. I hadn't really planned to cover start-sit questions tonight for the most part. I wanted to make this a trade deadline special, and I have covered each team's fantasy playoff schedule, questions in general, and I guess guys that I like as a result of playoff matchups. So I think that'll do it for me tonight. Appreciate you guys with this trade deadline special that I don't typically stream on Wednesdays, but appreciate everybody hopping in and spending some time. I will be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, ahead of Eagles Commanders to talk shop ahead of Thursday Night Football. Can start taking start-sit questions in a little bit more detail tomorrow because we'll have 2 full days of practice reports and injury reports and all that good stuff. And then, of course, I will have my typical start-sit streams this weekend. Saturday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern will be members only. The Sunday morning streams are members only rest of the season, but the Saturday streams are still open to the public. That'll do it for me tonight. Again, if you have any more trade questions, feel free to leave them as a comment on any video or stream on the channel, and we can sort things out ahead of your trade deadline and shape and mold your roster ahead of the fantasy playoffs. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your Wednesday night. I will see you guys tomorrow.